Creating a great culture for your team doesn't come from coffee perks or focus Fridays. It actually comes from intentionally creating a positive work environment that really impacts the people driving the success, right? So, one effective way to do that is to establish a culture that is rooted in strong ethics and recognizing your team as brand champions, empowering them to showcase your business as a fantastic place to work. That's the kind of culture and leadership that will build a lasting legacy and inspire future generations. So today we're speaking with Evie Wentink, an ethics culture expert who provides employee-centered ethics and compliance programs. With a master's in corporate compliance from Fordham University Law School and nearly 2 decades of experience, she's going to share her insights on how to cultivate a workplace culture that inspires brand ambassadors by harnessing the power of recognition and emphasizing the vital role of ethics. Let's dive in. Welcome, Evie. I'm so excited that you're here. We're going to talk about recognition, why it matters, how it can build a workplace culture of ambassadors, and really the critical role that ethics plays in shaping that culture, right?
Hi, Wendoly. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm super happy to be here talking about ethics, compliance, integrity, company culture, and why it matters to us also. Again, thank you so much for having me on.
So let's have a little bit of fun here and let's talk about the best recognition you've ever received at work and how it made you feel. Let's go there.
So, best recognition at work is or was for me when my boss nominated me to NJ Biz. It was the recognition program called Rising Stars. The special thing about that recognition was only lawyers were really generally invited to be participating in this kind of a recognition. So I was the first non-lawyer to be one of the finalists. I wasn't the finalist, but I was one of five who were brought to a special arrangement, special luncheon, and it was really nice. I mean, all the hard work that I was doing for the ethics and compliance program and legal department management really paid off and made me feel special.
I think sometimes just being nominated is really impactful. Like you don't have to necessarily take it all the way, but just being considered for it, I think is really it really just really impactful, right? It can really just hit your spirit and you feel seen and valued. I would say that for me, it was the time that an employer asked me to be a part of their brand ambassador program.
Mhm.
I was responsible for telling the world what a great place this was to work. But now my boss had said, hey, you're going to be on that team too, right? And I just felt so seen and I felt so recognized and it felt like my opinion mattered and she saw that too.
Yeah, that is great. And I think when our bosses and supervisors can see and give praise where praise is due, that it comes a really long way because I think it tends to motivate people.
Okay, so let's really dive into some of the fun topics here. So, as the ethics expert, Evie, what would you say exactly is work ethics in work culture?
All right, so let's break this question down a bit.
Yeah, it's a big question.
And I am going to say, according to ChatGPT, ethics is the branch of philosophy that deals with questions about what is morally right and wrong, good and
Mhm.
bad, fair and unfair. It
Mm.
involves systemic study of principles and values that guide the human behavior in the decision making. Ethics can be applied in various fields, including business, medicine, law, personal conduct, and often it seeks to address issues such as justice, rights, responsibilities, and the consequences and actions, right? So now
Yep.
we say, what is workplace ethics? It's a notion about what is right and wrong in your workplace. Frequently, companies have code of ethics, or also known as code of conduct, that provides employees with a manual in the way of what is right and wrong and what is expected at the workplace. So now we can answer the question about what is workplace culture. And I love this
Right.
one, and I've seen the meme all over the place that it says, it is what you feel like on a Sunday night. What is the feeling that you have about going to work on a Sunday night? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you anxious? Are you angry? That is really key to know about your workplace culture and how it's impacting yourself. Next part of the workplace culture is about if there are hard decisions to make in your business. Let's say you do sales and you could maybe cut a corner here or there. which way do you take? Do you do the right thing as your company tells you? Does your company stresses that it's important for you to do the right thing, or they leave it up to you and kind of put blinders on and say get the business done no matter what?
Don't even want to see.
Yeah. So, getting back to your question about what is workplace ethics and culture, it goes for everyone answering their own questions. What is your productivity? How far you're willing to go? Are you going to do right or wrong? Does that align with the company values? I think everyone at some point has to do a self assessment and where they are, but companies can communicate well to the employees if ethics, compliance, and integrity matters. That should be communicated in frequent ways at any level of the management so that everyone within the companies understand that that is the company value and that will lead to great culture. But it's not one and done kind of a deal. It has to happen over time, frequently. It's kind of like I always say, sitting at your kitchen tables, your kids know what you expect of them. That's exactly what it is when it comes to company culture.
Yeah, and I think like clearly articulating those expectations is so important, right? So that your people know
Right.
this is where we stand, this is how we operate. And I also love that quote, culture is how your people feel on Sunday night. And I would almost add, it's like how they feel every day going into work,
Right.
right? Every day that they have to come back from vacation, do they feel like they're part of a group that's doing great things in a great way, in a way that is, ethical and full of integrity, or are you constantly having to pull between your values and the company's values? So yeah, I love that. I love that quote too. And I love what you're saying about just kind of being about, the way your family talks about cultures, they having that expectation is really important.
Yes, I will add one more thing. Over the last couple months, I saw this great video that speaks to culture and values and all that stuff. It was a gentleman who, back in 2011, he was a salesperson who was introduced to an international trade, and he had the choice between doing right and wrong when it came to bribery and corruption scheme to get business for the company, and he did the wrong thing and ended up going to jail. He is now out and about and speaking about ethics and compliance, and I see his name everywhere. He travels everywhere because he really can speak to the ethical culture. And when he was describing what happened to him or what he did, I remember writing a question in his LinkedIn post and saying, if because he said we had the policy, we had training, but that was it, right? So the company was really strong on the policy and really training, but then the communication in between didn't happen. So when he was faced with making a good or bad choice about his business, he kind of was like, well, they didn't say not to do it and went with it anyway. So I spoke to him. It had to do with his workplace culture, you know?
In the spirit of Employee Recognition Day, which is actually early March, let's talk about why recognition is such a critical part of building a strong workplace culture. All right. So I believe that recognition validates efforts and reinforces behaviors that the company wants to see more of. And so employees who feel valued are more engaged, they're more productive, and they're less likely to leave a company that's like that. What do you think?
Yes, exactly. One company, we had a program that nominated ethical stars. It reinforced ethical behavior, and people, employees, coworkers were more likely to notice if the things you're doing are ethical or not.
Mhm.
So I think that was a great example.
Okay, so I love what you said there. And on the flip side, how can the lack of recognition impact employee morale and retention? What do you think?
I think retention goes beyond recognition. I think the recognition is the cherry on top. It's really nice to have, but companies must have employee friendly compliance program in place in order to translate compliance into positive business experience, positive employee experience where employees are happy to be working and productive. Being ethical is good for business and it's good for morale and it's good for retentions. I think companies need to start to understand that.
Yeah, I have to agree. I feel like when employees aren't recognized, they start to feel invisible, maybe unappreciated, which leads to disengagement, quiet quitting. That was a real thing for a little bit. It might still be.
Right.
And ultimately them leaving the organization or even spreading information about what it's like to work there. So I think a culture of recognition fosters loyalty and a sense of purpose,
Mhm.
and the opposite does the exact opposite.
Yeah, I would add to it to say if there is no recognition program or ethical behavior recognitions, if you take that off, more likely than not, companies don't have great compliance programs, or they may only have something that we call the check in the box compliance programs,
Mhm.
where the task matters more than doing the right
Mhm.
thing, and which translates to employees. I mean, so it is all related. Recognition is important. So if you see a company that has recognition programs, more likely than not, you will see them on the best place to work at. You
Best
know,
place to work, right?
yeah,
They're being recognized for it. Yep.
yes.
Okay, so I'm going to say something that might be a little bit, but I think there's a misconception or maybe a belief that compliance can be a little bit snoozy. So, how can companies make their compliance programs more fun and effective so people are willing to watch them and they're bought in, right? I think that's such a critical piece to having an effective program.
Wholeheartedly agree. Many programs, like we said in the previous questions, some companies choose to have this check in the box program that it hands over a big policy and expects people to read, retain, and understand it. I love making compliance fun. I
Mhm.
love breaking compliance content into bite sized pieces for employees to digest. I love creating compliance games. We've played Compliance Jeopardy, that was really fun. There is this app called Kahoot. We've played Compliance Kahoot, creating word searches and word kind of games, asking employees to participate in creating some of the content. We've done training videos that you had to create a training video, 1 minute or less, on any kind of compliance related content and use anything and everything that you can. That produced a lot of great material that people wanted to watch, that was entertaining, and you learned something new. Number one is you learn something by doing it, right? You had to
Mhm.
come up with the content. And number two, when you shared it, all of your friends, all of your coworkers were really interested what you yourself produced. It didn't come from a compliance executive, it came from a peer. And I think when you
Mm.
start reaching across the departments and finding ways to be creative with videos, always innovative. If you put innovation into compliance, you can make compliance fun. And that is always top priority for me, especially now thinking of the new generations coming in and how they learn.
How they consume. Yeah.
TikToks and short videos, it's really what they want. So we want to stay with the times because the goal is for them to get the message,
Right.
not get a binder kind of a
Right.
thing. That's what.
Yeah. And I actually think I love that even just across ages, right? I
Mhm.
think our attention spans are so short that we need to keep it short and we need to
Yes.
get to the point so that people understand the expectation and then what they're supposed to be doing with that.
Yes,
So I
I
love that.
will add that there is a time and place for a long kind of a training because there are certain legal requirements
Hmm.
like sexual harassment training. You have to have every year or every other year, depending on which state you have a hour or two of that, right? A lot of companies do code of conduct. I do think having that kind of a training at the beginning of the year or beginning of an employment is a good thing, and then follow up. But all the ones in between should be
Should be
short
short.
and sweet, to the point. Figure it out who is the audience, figure it out what is your risk area, and modify that to make it work for your organization, not just buying it off the shelf kind of a training. I think
Love
that's
it.
very important.
Yeah. So some of the mistakes companies make when it comes to conducting employee recognition, I believe, is that when they think of a recognition as only being a bonus, right? So non-monetary recognition can also be really powerful. Another thing could be just being too generic. A simple good job is just not as impactful or specific enough to praise what they've done to, to honor the company values or the company ethics. And only recognizing top performers, like you said, instead of creating a culture where everyone feels valued, everyone feels seen. What do you think, Evie?
So I think a lot of companies, it's easier to recognize a top performer, right? And I
Hmm.
think sometimes companies don't think of recognition in a different way. So for me, I'll give you an example. Companies will recognize top performer and go onto a safari in Africa for 2 week paid trip,
Yeah.
right?
Nice.
And yeah, it's beautiful, right? But it's only the ones who make money who are the salespeople. Really, nobody else from the company is seen as a top performer. So that's
Right.
a little strange.
Or
And then,
disheartening, really. It can really make you feel like, okay,
yeah,
I
it's just,
don't mean as much as the salesperson.
well, like let's my other point is what you're gonna love right now is the biggest mistake. So they do this big great thing for a certain group of employees, and then here you are as an employee who knows there's a piece of software or a tool that could help you be more productive and get you to a place where the company would be better, or maybe it's a program that would make the company better
Not
as a
about the
whole.
person.
It's not even about the person,
Yeah.
but it's about the company, and they will not invest in that tool and
Right.
make you do paper trails as opposed to using a certain tool because they say it's not in the budget. So how do you justify budget for salespeople? I think, when speaking of recognitions and the mistakes, companies should really pause and think about what they want to recognize, and not only recognizing good sales, because yes, that's a great incentive, but then think about all the different ways. It's like you said, it's the non-monetary things,
Yeah.
how that can be done. But then also look at, are you giving? Because I think part of this conversation is for people to want to work in certain companies. Are you giving the employees the right tools? Are you assessing that? And things change, technology improves so much. So are you staying with the times? Because we have to be quick, right? We have
Right.
to understand. So maybe every 3 years, companies should really assess their recognition program. And that should be part of the biggest mistakes because they probably don't. They're happy they're
Yeah.
doing this one thing and they just keep going.
Yeah. And I think being specific, like I said, is really important,
Yes.
right? For maybe a single mom with kids going to a safari may be something that actually can cause a lot of stress. Like, how am I going to manage all of this with my kids? Where maybe she just wants, and I don't want to simplify it, but maybe she just wants extra time at home. Maybe she just wants extra time so that she can balance it all, right?
Uh, I,
That's a form of recognition. And I
I
think
love that.
companies don't see that, you
Yeah,
know?
I love that adding flexibility to
Hmm.
the schedule, right?
Yeah,
Like having some kind of you're a great worker and we know you can handle this instead of, we're on budget, can't do ABC bonus, whatever, but maybe we can offer you 1 or 2 days working from home to make your home life more balanced. I
right.
think if people are responsible, it should be going away. So
Absolutely.
maybe even part of the biggest mistakes, there is none of this dialogue or conversation with the
No.
employees of what do you want, right?
No, it's really one-sided. It's like what benefits the company.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of the biggest mistake I think companies make,
Mhm.
not recognizing that without their people, their company won't function. And if you're
Exactly.
not loving on your people, then you're not really pouring into the biggest resource you have to
Mhm.
be impactful, to be successful, and you're actually hurting yourself.
Yeah. I read a quote as I was putting together my book that you just reminded me of it, and it had said like if you're happy and your mind is quiet, you're more creative. So
Hmm.
companies are taking that away from themselves because if
Yeah.
they have people who are not happy, who are worried about this, your mind is just so clouded with this worry that you could have brilliant people with great
Yes.
ideas, but you're missing that.
You know how many people are sitting behind a desk right now, have so many ideas, and they can't express them or pour them out because they're in back-to-back meetings, and it's creativity that can be filled in for the company, right? For the purpose of the company. But when employees are in back-to-back meetings trying to fill every cranny with time and work, you don't give them time to
Mhm.
think. And this is kind of like a side note, but as a new entrepreneur, that was something that for
Mhm.
me, I had to unlearn that. I don't have to sit in front of my computer doing meetings or emails to be effective. I can step away and actually just sit with myself and think about what I want to accomplish in the next week, in the next month.
I couldn't agree more. And I share the same
Yeah.
experience in when you had the time and the opportunity to step back, you're going to surprise yourself with
Hmm.
what do you know, how much you know, what people can learn from you. and how creative you can be in many different ways. I think companies, going back to what are the biggest mistakes, I think that's the top.
Agreed.
So
Go
let
ahead.
me ask you a question for a change. How does a company's approach to recognition influence their brand?
I love that question. And I personally think that when a company is good to work with for, it just spills out. Right. I think when people are being recognized, they feel seen, they feel valued, they feel appreciated, whether it's, to their friends or on social media, they'll just share about what a great place it is to work. And the opposite is true. If it's a bad place to work, it'll leak out also. Right. So that's why it's really important for companies to care about their reputation. And I think some of the things that companies do is they actually worry about what the perception is on the outside. And they don't worry about their people on the inside when it's really, you need to be focusing on the inside out. So that's what I think is what companies can do to enhance their brand or the impact of recognition on a brand. It's focusing on your people from the inside out.
Oh, I love that. I agree. I think, part of the employer brand is the 360 review, the
Mhm.
inside, outside. What do employees think? But also, what does the public think? Do companies ever check social media to see what people say about your brand, the good, bad, the ugly, having stars? In your review, do you do this? Do you set up a Google alert for your name and your company name to see if there is any media that talks about you? That usually happens if there is something published in like a newspaper type of organization, but you can
Yeah.
set up an alert to see what happens, because I think that it's really important to the brand as a whole, and to see,
What people are saying.
what, yes, exactly, what people are saying.
I think I think the alerts are great. I think the action that comes from those alerts is so important, right?
Yes.
Because I've been in organizations where the alerts are up, people say things, and it's almost like, oh yeah, there's always going to be a naysayer. We can't look at that. Instead of saying like, hey, where did this come from? Like actually care and dive into it and say, where's this come from? Is it true? Yeah, there are some people that are going to always say something negative, but is it true? What can we learn from this? And how can we move forward?
Yes, you will see that a lot of times in the companies will find things out from employees or
Mhm.
from whatever the source is, hotline or online, a social media post, and they don't look at the root cause. It's almost
Mhm.
as they're afraid, it's almost as it may affect their bottom line, and they're not realizing that having this negative impact could be even worse for their bottom line. Like,
Right.
there is a saying that the cover up is worse than the crime,
Yes.
which happens, and there's millions of examples, and you see it in all the movies that we watch. Like when people trying to cover up things, it gets worse, and you dig the hole deeper. So I think if companies can be brave enough to look into whatever the story is, and I can go into specific examples, but I won't. But I talk to people a lot at any levels of the company, and they have a lot to say, and some things they say could have been solved if the company
Agreed.
only looked into those
Right.
issues. And in the specific example I am thinking of, they didn't. They didn't
Yeah.
even ask. They brushed it off as something else, and that's not good for the company culture. So,
No.
if anything, if people are listening to this, and if we can give them a word of advice, if there is a smoke, like they say, there is probably a fire somewhere, and you should
Go
be
check it out.
check it out and looking into and talk to the people who are
Yeah.
involved. Don't just talk to one,
Yeah.
because you
Right.
can't solve a puzzle by just talking to one
Right.
person. So
No.
you kind of
There's
have to,
always multiple sides to the story. You got to figure out what that is.
yeah, what did they say? His side, her side, and the truth.
That's right. I want another question. Another question.
All right, another question. Excellent. So, how can companies turn recognition into an opportunity for authentic storytelling that attracts the top talent?
I love this question. And it really is the foundation of what I do as a brand photographer. When companies highlight real people and their contributions, it creates a more compelling and authentic employer brand than any stock photo could ever do for that company. So in every workplace culture brand session that I've been a part of or that I've led, I have had employees tell me how how much fun they had, and B, how they felt so seen, valued, and they felt like they were a part of something bigger. And when you give your employees that space to be a part of that bigger piece of your brand, there's impact there, and they feel like they belong, and they feel like, well, they can't let you down now, right? Because there's just I don't know, there's just this connection that comes with creating their story, building their story into your brand, right? And recognizing them. It just can't be done any other way.
I so agree. In one of the companies had worked, we created this compliance monthly communication. And the
Mm-hmm.
thing that I loved most about that particular company was we had employees submit their photos for a contest, and I would use those photos
Yeah.
for that communication, because to me, and this is to what you're saying, is if I see my coworker's
Mm-hmm.
picture in a part of a publication, I am more likely than not pay attention to read it. So
Right.
companies should engage, companies like yours to create these visual stories and then use those
Right.
across any at all compliance, ethics, integrity
Yeah.
kind of communication to share that message. I think that's so important.
Agreed. And I think like when that can be applied to any internal communication, any internal program, training, and also when it comes to recruiting and engaging and retaining talent,
Right.
right? So I remember talking to people, asking them about their career path with this organization and having their picture. If it was local to me, I would take their picture for them and then share their story. But the impact was very similar, right? The point of it was people felt seen. They were like, I know this person, I know her story. And they felt inspired by their story,
Right.
right? They were like, oh my God, if this person can do it, so can I. And there's a connection again. And then
Yep.
they're more willing to tell people, right? Like out on social, oh my God, I know this person, or oh my God, this is my story. They're just willing to, like I said, it spills from the inside out to share with the world.
And I think it also helps for the new employees coming into
Yes.
the organization, or at least people who are candidates and are interested in giving them more of a real picture of what the organization is like. I will give you the other side of the story that had to do with website, that there was an organization that they put picture on the website that did not represent the community of
Yeah.
employees at all, and you're like, why is that even here?
No.
So having
It's
authentic,
alive.
yeah, having
Right.
authentic pictures, it
Yeah.
can be so impactful. And if those pictures, in the way, I don't like to use the word, but you in the way have to sell your culture of integrity, ethics, and compliance, it's only better. People understand that from coming in directly to
Yeah.
your company, that because that's what you communicate always.
Yeah, and I talk about promoting it, right? I've had, yes, there you go. I love it. I actually had someone when I was in seat that said to me, I thought the company was very different based on what you were saying externally. And
Right.
I thought, I took that to heart. And I was like, at that point, I was like, we really need to start being more truthful in our visuals. If we say our people are the secret sauce, then our people should be at the front of everything we say and do. Otherwise, it feels like a sham. You know, it's like our people are awesome. And here's this amazing stock photo of a person you've probably seen on the highway who's also a nurse and a lawyer. It just feels like you're being lied to and it just breaks the trust.
You said a key word, authentic.
Yeah, it's authentic. Okay, so tell me in your mind, what are some ethical considerations that companies need to keep in mind when they are implementing recognition programs? What do you think?
So I think we really need to think about what behaviors are
Mhm.
we looking to promote, and how are those behaviors tied into the culture of, or the company values, the culture of ethics, compliance, and integrity.
I
So
love that.
make
Yeah,
sure you know the exact behaviors, not actions, but the behavior that prompts the
right.
action.
And how can we make sure that they're doing it in a way that is inclusive and unbiased?
So we can recognize the behavior clearly. You have to have some kind of a plan, so a structure about what is and what it isn't, right? Maybe create, or maybe leave it open to all employees to be able to nominate a person, and then have a panel to review those nominations, not just one person, right? So then you may get a representation from various departments. I would
Right.
like to also see getting a representation in the panel from various levels across the company. Yes, have an executive, but have a receptionist. Why not? Because we all share in this ethical culture and our company values. So it shouldn't really make a difference where you are. And I think that will help to trust the program because it's
Yeah.
not one person deciding. So
Yep.
you spread that out.
Yeah. And what are some of the risks that you think that come with putting something together like this to incentivize your employees for advocacy?
The only risk I say it's like if things get shared outside of the companies because it's hard to see a snippet of the whole picture, and sometimes we've seen with pictures, and you can speak to that with photography, you can make things look great or bad in the same
Mhm.
exact visual shot. So employees just have to be taught how to share things when
Mhm.
it goes beyond the company, and
How
maybe
they're representing the company, right?
right. And maybe adding a language that's like a disclosure saying, yes, I'm sharing this, but I'm sharing this as my own person. It needs to be clear so that the picture is clearer on the outside. But I think as far as risk with the recognition program, if it's done well, if it's thought about what behaviors you want to recognize, I don't think there's many issues. I think the issues happen when you don't think about it and maybe inadvertently you are recognizing wrong behavior because you're
Right.
only recognizing certain result as opposed to behavior. So that's when
Yeah.
you want to be careful.
From an employer brand side, putting together a program like that where you're also recognizing your people through a brand ambassador program, some of the risks that they're most fearful of is that when employees leave, they'll have to take all the pictures down, or maybe they'll leave on bad terms and they won't be a good representation of the company. And like you said, if you put a formal program in advance where number one, you are talking about the criteria that these individuals need to meet, right? Making sure that you're talking to HR, making sure you're talking to their manager, making sure that they're not a flight risk. I think that's really important. Making sure that they're exhibiting the values, that they're, in alignment with the compliance train, like all of that has to be considered in advance of. And then you can also put image release forms in place where they say, like, if this person chooses to leave, you still have rights to that picture because it was taken by the company for marketing purposes. But I think when you have a culture of recognition and you have a strong compliance program and you're really advocating for your people, I don't think that should be a reason not to have a program for thinking that some people might leave.
Right.
It's like
And I
just feel
mean,
good.
if you think about it further, even if they left, but it was good for the company, it's more likely than not if they're being recognized, it's also good for them that this picture is out there. So yeah, I don't think it's as a negative, but I definitely think companies should dot their I's and cross their T's when they're making recognition programs, and especially if they want to include visual and if they want to take it beyond their own internal venues and going outside to social media, whatever that may be. So definitely having release forms is something that compliance comes in again, to make sure that we do that.
Absolutely. Okay. So now I want to talk about something that is really like near and dear to my heart, brand ambassador programs. How can companies go beyond traditional recognition programs and establish and empower employees to become or to be the brand ambassadors for the company? Where should a company start? What's your take?
All right. Great question. So when I first thought about this question, I thought about it in terms of compliance ambassadors because compliance is stuff that I do. And I would look at all levels of the company for a compliance ambassadors. And in essence, their duties were to help me spread the message of compliance and ethics across the
Mm-hmm.
company. But when you think about a brand ambassador, the way I am looking at it is you have to tell them at the beginning of their employment,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's when you I want to say catch them and lay out the
That
plan
starts.
that in essence every employee is the brand ambassador for the company.
Mm-hmm.
Every employee can be visible because in the way, with social media everything is so open and so connected that everyone should think of themselves as the
Mm-hmm.
brand ambassador, right?
Right.
And
Right.
if you communicate company values, if you communicate company culture, it should be easy for the employee to understand what the expectation is when they're becoming a brand
Right.
ambassador. But to me, any employees could be it, just because things are so open. They're
I think, being a brand ambassador is such a privilege when you're working for an organization that you are proud of, right? So if we establish that early on, then people feel that responsibility to do the right thing. Not just because they've gone through a fluff program, but because they believe it. They're bought into it. And I think it's really important that the program itself have more than just leaders. We don't just need leader faces on the brand ambassador team, because everyday individuals actually have more clout than leaders themselves, because the perspective is that leaders have to say good things about the company, their leadership,
right.
right? But everyday people are in the trenches, they're on, doing the thing every day, and they just have more clout, more trust, more, like, people view them as authentic storytellers. And so because of that, I think those are the people that really should have prime spotlight.
Yeah, I mean, I will just add to that is, if
Mhm.
you spread your message, if you think of yourself as your company brand ambassador, it's probably, you will think that your culture is pretty good. So it will go along with what we talked about earlier with the retention, right? Because
Yeah.
I want to hold on to a job I'm happy at, allows me to innovate it and do all these great things. So that's where I will want to be. And I would be proud to be a brand ambassador for a company that I believe in, right?
Okay. Thank you, Evie, so much for spending time with us today. Honestly, I could talk about this stuff with you for hours. I think we have in a couple of instances, but we'll be sharing your contact information in the comments. So if anybody's looking to elevate their ethics and compliance program, you are the person for it. You are so passionate about this stuff, and rightfully so. It's important. So I just want to thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on and helping me to spread the message about just doing compliance better and for the people, because that
Mm,
is always my goal. That's the only way to get it done, is when you think of the people. And I think we said
yeah.
that in the podcast today. So thank you so much for having me on.
Anytime. Have a great one. I love the mug. Where can we get the mug? Is there a
On
shop for
my,
it yet?
yes, yes, there is Etsy. It's the Ethical Edge by Evie shop on Etsy, where you can get my merch and my t-shirt.
I love it. All
Thank you
right,
so
Evie.
much.
All right, bye.